Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today in our webinar, The Changing Landscape of Remote Working, How the File Fabric Can Help. I'm Maria, I'm in charge of the marketing department here at Storage Made Easy, and I'm really excited to present our two speakers for today's session. Jim Little, CEO of Storage Made Easy. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
And James Norman, Head of Engineering at Storage Made Easy. Hello, James.
Hi, Maria. Pleasure to be here from home.
Great. So quick reminder for you all, this webinar will be recorded and you'll be able to access it anytime on our YouTube channel at SME Storage and the video gallery on our website, storagemadeeasy.com. Also, feel free to leave any questions you may have during the session in the chat box, and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. Now, I'm handing over to you, Jim and James.
Thanks, Mariado. So I'm going to go through the slides. I'm Jim Little. I'm the CEO of Storage Made Easy and also the founder. And then I will hand off to James, our head of engineering, to go through a demo, which is really, I guess, what a lot of people want to see. So I'll keep the slides fairly short. If you just flick the slides over, James. Firstly, I would like to offer my sympathies to anyone who's been affected or who have family or friends that have been affected by the coronavirus. I guess at this time it may seem strange to be thinking about business, but many companies and employees are attempting to work from home. And we know from the inbound requests that we've had that there really is a surge of interest with regards to wanting to understand how this can be done in a secure, compliant way, often using existing storage solutions that companies already have in place. The practical aim of this webinar is to take a look at some of these challenges and then jump straight into a demo and practically look at how the file fabric may be used to help solve some of these. Next slide, James. So let's take a look at some of the remote working challenges that we've certainly heard about from people reaching out to us. One of them is that sensitive data quite often still resides on premises, and accessing existing on-premises storage, whatever its form, whether it's locked into Windows filers on an internal SAN or NAS or SMB shares or internal object storage, it's proving challenging, particularly given the amount of time people had to set things up before remote working came into force. Yes, some companies have VPNs, but we're hearing that these have their own challenges. Firstly, there's not often enough VPNs in place, particularly if an entire workforce is suddenly en masse trying to work from home. And VPNs in this scenario can quickly be overwhelmed with remote connections. And because all traffic passes through a VPN tunnel, specific traffic often has to be tunneled separately if you want any quality of service for specific applications or for the internet, or for the network, etc. The simple truth is most corporate networks were simply not designed to perform under this type of simultaneous demand, because access is not HTTPS based, it's not web scale, and it's not web ready. Also, we've seen that some companies reach out to us to repurpose accounts that they already have on Google infrastructure, on Microsoft infrastructure, or Amazon infrastructure, but they want to take some of the space they've got, but have some more sophisticated end user access, for the period where people have to remote work. So there are challenges, not only on cloud, but also on premise. Next slide, James. The other obvious one, of course, is security risks. We've heard a lot now from CISOs and companies in general that one of the key capabilities they require is to protect sensitive data remote employees access, share, and collaborate on whilst they're actually working remote from the office. Now, whereas confidential corporate information like financial data, contracts, etc., may have been locked to office infrastructure, access as more employees begin to work from home means a lot of this data is accessed and worked on remotely. Of particular concern to a lot of companies is the compliance legislation and obligations that many companies have, and of course the vulnerability to breaches because of a change in workflow or inadvertently sharing a folder or bucket because of workflow restrictions that doesn't get unshared. The next slide, James. The other big issue is just productivity and user workflows. Most user workflows are very ingrained You know, lots of users spend time in email, they're on their home drive, they've got relevant apps they jump in and out of, and productivity can drop, you know, quite significantly for remote employees when these workflows are removed. And actually, worse than that, it's often the very act of changing these workflows and the routine that can result in security or compliance issues. The real question is, how closely can user workflow be maintained whilst complying with legislation and corporate security policies and guidelines? Of course, we believe that, you know, the enterprise file fabric can help, you know, with this solution. You know, we're a 10-year-old company, and for those of you who don't know, our product, the file fabric, unifies on-premises and on-cloud storage into a single unified workspace, essentially to promote a single point of access, single point of compliance, single point of security for corporate data, while simultaneously promoting end-user productivity and enhancing user workflows. This is what we're going to demo to you today. So without further ado, I will hand you across to James Norman, our head of engineering, who will demo the solution.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so you know, thanks very much, Jim, for sort of the outline there, really around you know, how that positions, you know, our product. And what I'm hoping just to take everyone through in this session is exactly how, you know, we as a company and our product, the Enterprise File Fabric, can help to enable some of those remote workers, some of those people who have perhaps, you know, never been working from home before, and some of those people who have only, you know, been working at home perhaps for a little bit, how we can really enable them to work from home in a way that is both compliant, secure, and auditable from the organization's perspective, but also convenient to use from the end user's perspective as well. So we're going to start by having a look at the Enterprise File Fabric, and some of you may already be familiar with the Enterprise File Fabric, and some of you may not. The Enterprise File Fabric is a virtual appliance that you can deploy on-premise or in the cloud. So for example, on-premise, you can deploy it into platforms like VMware, Hyper-V, for example, and other virtualization platforms. And you can also deploy it into the public cloud, for example, into services like Amazon Web Services, Azure, and Google, amongst others. Like I said, it's purely virtual, so it really doesn't take long to spin up at all. And, you know, really within the next sort of 15-20 minutes throughout this demonstration, we're really going to drill in on how to set this up to enable those remote workers to get the best out of the file fabric and to help them to continue working. So we've expressed a little bit of the setup here, but we'll really drill in and focus on the real key areas. So we're going to start by logging in as our organizational admin account here, something I've just set up ahead of the demonstration. As we log in here, there's a few things that we'll need to do just to enable access for our users to work from home. Two of those key areas are the storage that we're going to be using, and the second piece is the authentication. How are our users going to be authenticating into this solution? We'll start with the authentication question. The file fabric itself provides built-in accounts, but it also provides integrations into Active Directory and SAML-based identity management platforms. So, you know, what we can, and I just want to, Jim, I just want to check that you can see our slides okay? The screen okay?
I can, yeah. Occasionally I see a couple of little bubbles, which is a nuance of the WebEx tool where it sort of replicates your cursor, but it's fine.
Okay. All right. So where we'll start is we'll start by having a look at our authentication systems. This screen is controlling exactly how our users are going to log into the File Fabric platform. I've already been ahead and set up our integration into, you know, in our case, our corporate Active Directory system. And I'm just going through some of the settings here. Some of you may be familiar with those, either through configuring the File Fabric or configuring other similar products. It allows you to control a large number of options in here in terms of how users sign into the platform. And once you've got this, our users will be able to sign into the platform. And in this case, we actually, a few of us have already signed in ahead of time that we can see from our staff screen over here. You can see in this case, we've got Jim's logged in already, and also myself. And of course, anybody else in our Active Directory domain could now log into this platform. If we wanted to, we could restrict that. We're not going to do that at this point, but it is something within your control as well. So our users will now be able to log in. So Jim could log in and I could log in using my Active Directory credentials. The key thing to remember here is, of course, that these aren't going to be a new set of credentials for our users. These will be credentials that users are familiar with, and all of the policies and restrictions and controls around how secure their passwords must be, they're all still going to be defined by your identity management system. So whether it's in terms of password complexity, rotation policy, those will all still be defined by your Active Directory or SAML-based identity management platform. So we've got our users and they can sign in. You'll also notice that these are actually bringing in their group and role memberships. In this case, there's some rather primitive normal groups you would expect, like domain users, for example. However, if these users also had other groups on the Active Directory, those groups will also be brought in. And that becomes particularly helpful later on when we start to look at things like permissions for directories. The next phase that we want to sort out will be our storage. Which storage do we want to let users have access to? The file fabric isn't going to seek to replace the storage that everyone has today. Okay, we're there to complement and provide the secure access into the storage. You're going to keep whatever storage you have, and the file fabric itself can speak to over 60 different types of storage platforms. That can include storage platforms that are typically on-premise, like file servers, SMB shares, CIFS shares, DFS, through to FTP servers, through to perhaps on-premise object storage, like S3 compatible storage, like Cloudian, through to public cloud storage, like Amazon S3 and Azure. So we can speak to a whole gamut of different storage platforms, and those are all accessible here via our dashboard. For you to add your storage, you simply press the button here to add a new storage. You can select from the list of different storage platforms that are available here. So for example, if we wanted to connect some S3 compatible object storage that we potentially had on premise, we go through the simple wizard that we provide here in terms of entering the endpoints, the access keys, the secret keys. The next phase from here will be to show you things like which buckets would you like to provide access to, so you don't have to import every single bucket. And then the file fabric goes away and builds a metadata model of that storage, understanding what files and what folders are on that storage. Like I said before, we are not going to pull all of that content into the file fabric. Your content and your files will stay exactly where it is. Once we have our storage connected, we will see it from our dashboard, like we were reviewing beforehand. And in my case, I've already got two different types of storage connected here. I've got some file system type storage. I've also got my on-premise S3 compatible object storage as well. We can drill into the settings of those storage platforms just using the cog here, and we can review information about this particular storage platform. For example, the access key that we're using, through to how much data we have on that storage, through to the settings that we're using for that storage, like server-side encryption for the encryption at rest on the storage, through to things like multi-part uploads and signature versions. All of these options will be different depending on the storage platform you're using on the back end. You'll also notice here from this view, this particular S3 storage that we have also has a little life-saving symbol next to it. This indicates the presence of our OffRiver File functionality. The OffRiver File functionality automatically archives file changes onto a secondary storage target. That secondary storage target is configured exactly the same way that our existing storage targets are configured here, and we'll see which storage targets we have here. In our case, we're backing up all of our files, say, onto a public cloud. So anytime a user makes a file change on a particular storage system, we're able to then make an archived copy off to a secondary storage platform. That's great for use cases where we're looking at things like ransomware protection. So if you want to try and recover a directory or a set of files following a ransomware attack, or things like business continuity should your primary storage platform go down, this OffRiver File functionality is really key to helping you to protect against ransomware and also primarily business continuity as well. We won't be focusing so much on that in this demonstration. We've got lots of videos on our YouTube channels around how that works, but that's a key thing to remember. And this will be happening in the background throughout this demonstration. So we've configured part of our storage. However, one of the big challenges that clients speak to us about is users needing to access on-premise file shares from outside of the office. Typically, users will have access to, say, for example, an S drive on the Windows machine or a network mount point on their Mac. However, as Jim was speaking to earlier in the presentation, accessing those out the office is particularly troublesome for a number of reasons. For example, SMB and CIFS is not very performant over the internet. It's very chatty. It also requires that VPN connection. And as Jim alluded to, if we've got all of our staff, say 30,000 staff, now all piling in using VPN connections, pretty soon that VPN connection is going to fall over, unless we have sufficient systems in place to help support it. So how can we enable users to access those SMB shares that we have on premise? How can we enable them to access that now at home, perhaps on corporate provisioned machines, perhaps on users' home laptops? Maybe they don't have a laptop for home. The File Fabric provides a really neat integration with that particular use case in terms of enabling users to get access to those on-premise file shares through the File Fabric in a way that is both secure and compliant with the organization's policies, but also integrates with Active Directory such that users will only see the folders and files that they have explicit permissions to on the Windows Active Directory. The really neat thing as well about how the File Fabric handles all of this is that it doesn't require any redefinition of permissions within the File Fabric. It doesn't require a mass migration. I've heard it a few times from numbers of customers at the moment who've, IT have sort of decided that they want to do a big OneDrive migration. It's very, very risky at this point in time because everyone wants to maintain business continuity in this rather sensitive time that we're in. So with the File Fabric, it really just sits alongside what you have already and really enhances it to make that available for end users at home. This actually ties into our authentication system settings, and it's something that you'll find at the bottom of the screen here. I've already been through and done some basic configuration here, just to save everyone in the demonstration from having to see me just input a load of fields. But there's really just a few key things here. We input the share path that we have. So this could be, say, for example, a single SMB server, or this could be a DFS share, for example. We input the shares, we input the things like the protocol versions that we want to use, how users are going to log in, and what we want it to be called. And so immediately when our users log into the File Fabric, they'll be provisioned access to that storage, and they'll see exactly what they would see had they been in the office accessing that, say, on the S drive. When we flip over to seeing the user, I'll show you exactly how that is. But you can see there's just a few fields here that you have to configure in order to get up and running with this. So we've done really two things so far. We've looked at our configuration for how our users are going to log in, and we've looked at how we can provision access to the storage here. Before we go and hand this over to our users, it's also really important to make sure that this system is set up and tuned in a way that it's compliant with our existing organization policies. Nobody wants to be releasing a system to end users that is going to flout any of the existing compliance, requirements or controls that the organization will need in place. There's a couple of areas we'll focus on here. The first I'd like to focus on really is around our policy engine. The policy engine is really extensive in terms of controlling which functionality users are able to see. It controls everything from user governance options, from which functionality is available to end users, through to which storage platforms they're able to see. through to file sharing policies, like whether they can share files with people internally, whether they can share files with people externally, whether passwords, for example, must be required when they're sharing files, whether, and we'll set one up in this case, whether shared links must have, expiry times preset. Also, whether we require, reasons for why people are sharing files. We have really extensive policy options here around file sharing. This also straddles into things like security options. So if you want to enable things like two-factor authentication for your end users, making sure that when they sign into the system through whatever identity source they come in through, whether that's SAML, for example, or Active Directory, whether they then must be presented with a two-factor authentication through our TOTP type integrations. You can configure that here through the File Fabric interfaces. This also expands out to things like encryption. So the File Fabric can help to encrypt data at rest on the storage. And we do that through multiple layers. Whether you want to use storage level encryption provided by your storage vendor, like on the S3 side, where you could use server-side encryption, or you could use disk level encryption, for example, on file shares typically. Or you can also utilize the File Fabric's built-in FIPS compliant security, where we can encrypt, the whole file system if you want the whole file system to be encrypted at rest as files traverse through the system, or if you just want particularly sensitive directories encrypted at rest on the storage, that is also possible through here too. There's also versioning and trash controls, allowing you to make sure that you're retaining, say, for example, 5 previous versions of any particular document, and also turning on trash, which is where files will go once they've been deleted, allowing you the ability to restore those files should someone have accidentally made an accidental change to a document, or even potentially deleted a document without really knowing. Both of these functionalities also integrate into our what we call our OffRiver File functionality, which gives you even more options should you need to recover documents from a particular archive. There's lots of other options. We won't go through all of them, but there's certain options around user interfaces, around, again, what they see through certain UI options, and also branding. Really important for all organizations to make sure that the system looks and feels like a corporate issued environment. You can change the logos, you can change the styling, the colors. There's even more branding options outside of this screen. This just gives you some of the very basic ones. So these are the many of the policy engine options that we have. And like I said, this is an enterprise grade product. We've been building this, as Jim said, now for nearly 10 years now. We've been building this for the enterprise really from the ground up. So that really shows in a lot of the options that you get through these screens. But there's a couple of other options we'll go through here. The second one is around our content discovery. Let's just quickly say those options before we move off. There we go. So moving on to our content discovery, as we are all, pushing new data into these storage platforms, working with the data that we have, it's really important to understand where the organization is keeping sensitive data. That could be sensitive data from a sort of a national compliance level, like GDPR, for example, making sure we're keeping email addresses, telephone numbers, bank account details, anything like that in a appropriate way, in a secure way that only nominated individuals have access to, for example, or whether that's sensitive information pertinent to the organization, like customer reference numbers, for example. The File Fabric provides these content discovery options to be able to find out where you have sensitive data within the whole file estate. The File Fabric comes with a large number of built-in what we call detectors. So that's everything from credit card numbers to phone numbers to email addresses to dates to times to even Canadian passport numbers. There's a very large selection in there of available detectors. But the File Fabric is also flexible enough to allow you to build and add your own in here too. Here I've already turned on a GDPR detector. You can see I've got some particularly sensitive GDPR detectors enabled here for the organization. I can easily select from the list, some of the many that we actually have available, for example. So if we're interested in, say, Spanish passports, we can simply enable that, add that to the list. And now anytime a new document comes through and it's scanned, we're going to start alerting based off of Spanish NIF numbers. Like I mentioned, you can also add your own rules, but this happens in the background for the end users. It doesn't interrupt their flow, but of course, anytime a sensitive document is discovered, that will then be alerted to the administrators and the nominated administrators too. So we've configured our content discovery. The final piece I'll just quickly show in here is around our auditing as well. Absolutely everything that's going to happen in this solution is audited end to end. Everything from Jim logging in to Jim logging out, Jim making changes, sharing files, it's all completely audited and tracked here from these interfaces. All of these audit logs can be reviewed. You see I've got 390 pages worth of audit logs here. We can export these off to the compliance team if we want to through various different formats that they might be interested in. We also have system level integrations where we can stream these off to other systems as well. If you want to fine tune what's been going on, you can search in these logs based off users and particular date ranges, tools that were being used, for example. There's a wide variety of options to really drill into certain behaviors that are going on so you can proactively understand what's going on your system. So before we just going over to flick to the, before we go and see from a user's perspective, we're just going to spend one final screen here on the admin side, having a look at the file manager. The file manager is really the meat and the potatoes of the product. Where 99% of all the action takes place after it's been really configured. Here we see the different storage endpoints we've got. We can drill into the different storage platforms we've got. Here we're going to go into the object storage. The really nice thing about actually the object storage is we're seeing this as files and folders. We can navigate into these. We can also pull out, say, for example, the top-down tree from the left-hand side, giving you different ways of navigating the file system. One of the things I hear actually quite frequently around object storage is, how can I assign permissions to directories? With the file fabric in our shared team folders, that we make it really easy to do that. You'll notice that this folder here has a person icon against it. That means that this folder can be has permissions that can be managed on it. We can right-click, select the permissions. In this case, we have already some permissions set up on this directory. This works in a very similar way to Active Directory managed permissions. So if you've got a background in that, you'll pretty quickly get up to speed with in terms of enabling access to certain directories. We can select groups and also users from this list. So if we want to assign this folder to being marketing members, we can give them, say, read or read-write permissions on these directories. And we also have even more fine-tuned permission modifiers down here where we can even further restrict what they can do, just in a very similar vein as to how you would, say, from a Windows management perspective. In this case, we'll leave the two permissions we've got on this directory in terms of James and Jim, and we'll log in now as those users. Just to recap, really what we've done so far is we've configured all of the storage. We've enabled some access into our on-prem filers. We've enabled some access into the object storage. We've enabled some permissions. We reviewed also a lot of the policy options and the auditing as well. So now all of this is really taking shape, ready for our users to log into this platform. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the questions box as we go along. We'll be more than happy to either take them if they're relevant as we go, or also at the end. So in my case, I'm going to be logging in now as myself, and I believe Jim will also be doing the same from his side. And as we log into the file fabric, we'll get taken straight to the file manager as the regular user. We're now in as this regular user, so we're going to see far less of what the admin was seeing beforehand while the file fabric loads. And obviously, as an individual user, we'll also see what we have permission to see as well. So when we log in, we now see our file shares. These are our on-prem file shares. We can now access through the web browser. We can navigate into these directories, have a look at the corporate information, the human resources. We can navigate into our home directories if we want to. So I can see my home directory. Jim has his own folder, but I don't see it because we don't have access to that folder. We can have a look at the files we've got in these folders, for example. We can see previews of these files here within the directories. So in this case, we're working with a preview with Microsoft Office Online, but we also support on-premise previewers as well, and previewers with other different formats too. We can also, easily flick through these decks if we want to. Some of you guys might have recognized this particular deck. But we also support previews with lots of other file formats too, including things like videos, images, audio files, text files, also all the way through to DICOM images as well if you're in the medical industry. We can also likewise navigate across to, say, the object storage. From an end user's perspective, it's just another folder in the hierarchy. We can look at these files that we have here. You'll also notice that we've got 3 versions here. That's the versioning kicking in. We can right click and we can choose to open this with Microsoft Office Online. And let me just pull up the credential. I'll show you that in just a second. So you can edit that in Microsoft Office Online with other users. So you can collaborate in real time with other colleagues. So let me just pull up my login details for that. And I'll do that in just a second. So, we can see and work with these files here in place. We can also choose to open these files in what we call Cloud Edit. This is going to pull this file down to my desktop. Open it in my Microsoft Word, for example. And let me just pull Word from my second screen. There we are. So we can see here, for example, we've just right-clicked. That file is now open in our Microsoft Word locally. We could make a change. We could put a number in here. Make a change, press save, and now that file is going to be pushed back up to the storage. Really simple, really effective for end users. The file fabric's not going to proprietize the data in any way at all. Okay, so what you put into the file fabric is what you'll get out on the storage. This is why it works really well with your file shares. It makes it really easy to sit the file fabric alongside your file shares, alongside your other storage, and work with it in place. We're not going to proprietize the data, convert it in any way, make special hieroglyphs of files. It is just going to be what you put in is what you get out on the storage, and there is no lock-in there. Once we've got these files in here, if we wanted to share our budget file, for example, we could click the share button up here. We support sharing with people, say, internally. You might want to use our groups functionality for that. We also support sharing with people externally as well, which is what I'll show you now. Here on the sharing, we've got a number of controls here. This makes it really easy to share with people internally and externally. And when we're open up this dialog, we can choose to generate a link, or we can also send it by email too. As per the compliance requirements that we set up just a few minutes ago, you'll notice that some of the fields are actually pre-populated because these are being controlled and governed by our IT compliance policy. So we can't actually override the expiration, and we're also forced into setting a password. So we can set a password, and as per the compliance requirements, we're also required to specify who we're sharing with it and also why we're sharing this file as well. So I'm going to share this with Jim. We're going to say we're going to share this for the demonstration. We generate a new link to this file, and then now we could send this, for example, in an email to Jim. One of the things that we hear a lot from our clients is that sharing files is often very difficult. Sometimes that sharing files can be difficult internally, but also externally. And there's often a number of factors around that. Some of the simple factors are things like email servers can't cope with large files, for example. So then the staff end up going off into shadow IT, creating a Dropbox account or making an FTP server and sharing the files that way. Again, that goes completely under the compliance radar and is very dangerous for the organization. There's also other factors to that as well. For example, how are they going to share that file that's on the Windows file share, for example? Do they drag it off the network drive and do they put it somewhere else? How are they going to do that? Can they share it in place, but they can't really do that with someone outside of their Active Directory domain, for example? So there's lots of different restrictions there. There's also, one of the biggest ones around compliance, around things like GDPR, for example. If these files contain sensitive information, potentially about our staff or about our customers, how are we going to share that in a secure way? How do we prevent people from forwarding that on also? So with this file sharing functionality that the File Fabric provides, it helps to prevent a lot of that forwarding on of files onto other recipients, so that we can make sure that we're sharing this file with the nominated individuals only, and they're not able to actually send it on to other people. We've generated a link here. We can open this up. Let me just open a new window. This is what the link would look like for the end user. When they open the link, they need to enter the password in order to access the file. If they enter the incorrect password, of course, they won't be able to access the file. And of course, if they were to access it over a day later, then of course, they wouldn't be able to access the file either. Once they have, they're then able to download the file and get access to that file. If they were to forward the link onto someone else, because we put some access controls around it, they wouldn't be able to access that either. Once we've got all this information indexed, through our file shares and through our other storage that we have access to here, we can also easily search for this information. So if we're looking to find, for example, where we've got references to our contracts, we can use our search engine to find files that reference our contracts. This search is not only in the file names, but also in the file contents too. So we see a number of references coming back, some coming back in the file name, but some others also coming back in the file contents. We can then work back to where these files are in our file system and work with these and find out which particular document we're looking for. You'll also notice up here at the top, the tasks, they're chewing away in the background. They're working their magic. They're performing some of that forever file recovery in the background. And as a user, I don't need to worry about that. That's just happening in the background for me. And it's nothing that I need to be concerned about. So as we make changes, as Jim makes changes, as I make changes to certain documents, those are just happening in the background. Users don't need to keep their laptops open in order to make sure that those files are backed up somewhere else securely. So, what we've seen so far is we've seen, really, in the short space of this demonstration, we've seen how we can facilitate access to our on-prem file shares. We've seen how we can facilitate access into other storage platforms like object storage, for example. We've also seen how we can integrate that with our Active Directory, tie that all together so that users can access their file shares, outside of the office in a convenient way. How they can share files, how they can collaborate. So for example, if they want to collaborate on this file, we have things like commenting as well. So if I wanted to mention Jim, for example, we can comment on this file, for example, send a comment to Jim. And now Jim has Jim will now get a notification telling him that a comment's been made on this file, and he can come and draw his attention to it. So we've seen some of the productivity, the collaboration, the sharing. Of course, you can do everything you expect from a file system through here as well. So, we can move files even between tiers. So if we wanted to move a file from this directory over to our home space, it's just as simple as a drag and drop between the two storage platforms. That now happens in the background. And should we go over to this directory, when it's finished, we'll then see the file popping into that view. For example, here we are. We make it really easy to perform all of these actions. We've only focused so far really on what we call the web interface for this. However, we also provide mobile access. So if your staff, if your colleagues, if you've got students, whoever you're working with, whoever you need to facilitate that access to, you can provide that in, for example, access on an iPad, on an Android device, on an iPhone. We have native apps built for those platforms. You can access those on the go outside of the office in a really easy way. And of course, that works with all of the native integrations on those devices too. And we also provide, desktop software for Mac, for Windows and Linux. As a Mac user, I'm very accustomed to lots of software not being available on a Mac, particularly around, accessing file shares and things like that. So it's really nice, with the File Fabric that, we have native Mac software, native Windows software, native Linux software that can really facilitate the access to this storage when I'm at home, when I'm working from home. And of course, all of us are working from home right now, so we're really giving everyone a true example of how this works. Particularly on the desktop sides, we provide things like network drives. So if they want to have that network mount point there on their local machine, they can have that. But it'll be far more efficient than using, say, Samba or CIFS to connect over the internet to it. We also provide the offline synchronization as well. So if they want to synchronize a specific directory down to their local machine to work with it offline, maybe they don't have a very good internet connection, for example, they can do that too. And we also provide lightweight explorers that provide a native application on the desktops to navigate the file systems. Over and above all of this, there's also protocol access. So we've got things like WebDAVs and FTP type interfaces. So if you've got some common applications or tools that can speak to FTP servers or speak to WebDAV interfaces, that makes it really easy in order to connect to those. And of course, this is all backed by our extensive API that all clients are available to use. I've worked with a number of clients who use that really extensively to also power, as Jim was referring to, some of their own custom workflows as well. Really important for everyone to, if they want to integrate with those. So we've covered, quite a fair range of, of our functionality. There is a lot more that we could cover. We're more than happy to set up demonstrations with everyone. But I think at this point now, I think I'll hand back to Jim to perhaps just do the wrap up. And of course, if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop those in now, just ahead of the question section.
Thanks, James. If you just want to navigate back to the slides. So just in summary, I guess, we looked at three things in terms of some of the questions that we were being asked by some of our customers. The first of which was access to storage silos and how quickly could something be put in place. And the reality is very quickly. We can, index and get access to on-premises CIFS, SMB, Windows filers and make them available, often within hours. Similarly for, having users access shared space on, S3 backed by, corporate LDAP or Active Directory. Again, we can do that, very, very quickly. In terms of minimizing the security risks, well, as you've seen from James's demo, we can make sure that even if they're accessing that from home remotely, all of the things that you would expect to happen continue to happen. We're auditing, we're checking to see who's sharing, who's accessing data, so that if you get a subject access request from GDPR, you have all that information available. And that even happens, when you're accessing data from your shared out Windows filers, which actually may not be even happening today. All of the compliance pieces you can configure. So we have, templates for GDPR and CCPA. And the key piece of that is it's all in real time. So even when your users are uploading data from home, in the background, we're checking immediately, whether that data contains sensitive information. And if it doesn't, then it's stopped being used until somebody checks it. So you have some protections there in case of, breaching PII, PHI, even though people are working from home and dealing with data. Similarly, a lot of the user productivity and user productivity workflows don't really change for users. They'll have a desktop drive, just like they did when they were in the office. They'll have plugins to things like Outlook and Mac Mail where they can share links. Those links are backed off to those policies that you've already predefined. Everything that you access in the file fabric is done through your existing identity management, and actually you can make more secure using two-factor authentication. So there's a lot there that you can get quickly to build an ecosystem to allow people to work from home in a single product, in a single view. I noticed that we don't actually have any questions.
We do have a couple of questions here, so I'll just go over and read this to you. So our first question is it possible to map some selected storage as drive in Windows Explorer or only via browser?
Yeah, also in Windows Explorer. James, do you have that available?
Yeah, if you just give me a second.
So yeah, we have desktop drives that are available directly from the desktop, and tools that are available directly from the desktop. And for an end user, it looks just the same as a home drive. Is there another question, Mariano?
Mm-hmm.
While James is preparing that.
Yes, so we have another question here. It says, we use virtual clients with Windows 10 based on VMware. How can we install File Fabric on that?
So if you're already using virtual clients to get access to things like Windows 10, be that VMware based or be that Citrix based, we already have customers who are using the File Fabric product, the tools, if you like, directly through those environments. So they can do that using our installable tools, or they can do that using, for example, WebDAV mappings. Just a script that instantly appears as a shared drive. Those are all backed by the File Fabric's policy and guidelines. So there's a variety of ways that you can use the product in those environments. You can either use our protocol adapters, or you can use our desktop tools. But we already have customers today who use this in virtual environments of that nature. Any other questions?
And here, for example, just going back to that previous question, here is an example of the network drive. So you see here down the left-hand side, we've got the cloud drive here, for example. So this is powered by our cloud drive software. That is also accompanied by our Cloud Sync and Cloud Explorer, and that gives you that network mount point interface that people look for. And of course, it works and behaves like any other network mount point. So, if you've got in this case, a DICOM image, for example, you can just double click on that file, for example, open it up. Let me drag that window over so you can see it, and you can just work with the files like it's any other network mount point. However, of course, this is all being, channeled through the File Fabric, providing that security, audit, and compliance, and also access outside of the office.
Okay, we do have another question here. It says, may you explain more how web file share works? I think it could be interesting.
How web file share
works?
Okay, do you want to take that one, Jim, or shall I?
I think if I understand the question correctly, essentially, what we do in terms of when we do the sharing from the web, you have a variety of mechanisms that can be used for that sharing. We have our own, if you like, abstraction that generates a secure link in which the policy that you've set has to be satisfied for that secure link to provide access to the file or the folder. One of the things we didn't touch upon, as we went through this, is the variety of ways that users can interact with you as well as you can interact with users. One of those ways is to provide a shared folder link in which you allow people to drop files in from outside of the organization to you. And the key thing about that, again, is that those files that they are dropping in for you are also going to be checked by our content engine to make sure that they don't contain any content that shouldn't be being shared or contain any viruses, for example. So those, we create the abstraction of the link. We don't need to open a bucket on Amazon S3 or open anything of that nature. It's a secure abstraction. James, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a really good, succinct description. I mean, it's really, sort of, we had limited time, so we sort of showed the one-way sharing, which Jim mentioned. There's also two-way sharing. So if you need to receive files back from someone you're working with externally, then of course you can facilitate that securely through the File Fabric without having to email or set up some other storage platform in order to do that. And also, of course, with the File Fabrics, we have an integration that you can turn on with an antivirus platform. So those files can actually get scanned for viruses on upload, so that you can prevent anything that looks malicious coming back into the organization, as you go forward as well.
The other thing that potentially we didn't touch upon, just because we ran out of time, and we may well repeat this session and focus on some of the features that we didn't manage to cover today, is one of the things that occurs when people work from home is it becomes very difficult sometimes to deal with large files. In a corporate network, that's not a problem because the bandwidth is often larger than what it is at home. And the file fabric has a mechanism where it can split or parallelize files and serve them up in a parallelized way to make the file transfer quicker. And it does that from desktop to cloud or cloud to desktop, or from something like SMB to desktop. And that can have a huge advantage, particularly for staff and employees who are working from home who have to deal with large files, because often, when you are working from home, that becomes one of the bottlenecks and one of the challenges that you have to deal with.
Okay, we do have some more questions here. That is, how scales File Fabric? We have more than 300 users in parallel.
Yeah, so I think the File Fabric scales both up and out. So to give you some idea, I think the largest number of users that we've had is 100,000. Indeed, our own small business SaaS hosted service that you can get to at storagemadeeasy.com, which is essentially a cut down version of the full enterprise file fabric for small business. That's got over 300,000 users on it. And to give you an idea of scalability on files, we have a medical institution that we work with who has over 3 billion files, stored through the file fabric. So the solution is very scalable.
All right, there's another question here. Can you create, share links, or view the comments on your desktop tools, just like you showed on the web?
You can. Exactly the same. Not only through the desktop, but also through an email plugin that's sat inside of Outlook and inside of Mac Mail to make those workflows easier for end users.
All righty. Any other questions that you would like to ask? Okay, I guess we're done with questions then.
Okay, James, if you want to flick to the summary slide. So a final thought from my side, and it's communicate, don't commute, which some of you might not be familiar with, but it's from the author Arthur C. Clarke, who coined the term in the 60s. And he coined the term, not essentially for the coronavirus, but as a means to curb global warming, which he foresaw, and the use of the Earth's natural resources. And the reason I bring it up is, a long time ago when we first formed this company, this was the ethos for our company, because we were a small startup and we realized that, to get any type of reach, we had to, essentially work how people are working today, which is, work remotely and not, travel to go and see people, but to communicate and to use, all of the modern tools that people use today. And it seemed apt to finish the presentation, with that thought process, because I sense that in the future, the ethos behind communicate, don't commute is going to become normal working practice for most companies. On that note, I'd like to thank you for attending the webinar. We will do a follow-up webinar on remote working, and we'll focus more on the desktop and show you some of the more detailed product use cases there. I hope you found it useful. If you'd like to get in touch and have a dedicated demo for yourselves, you can get in touch with us, or actually you can self-schedule it from our website. Wishing that both you and your family and your staff, stay safe during the current pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.